Jennifer DiMarco is an author, musician, filmmaker, and game designer, and the regular host of Speak. But today, thank you for joining us today on Speak, Jennifer.
Thank you for hosting.
I will mention I am going to use a cheat sheet because I am not the regular host of Speak.
That's totally fair.
Over the course of the first season of Speak, watchers got to meet 10 very different authors.
11. It turned out to actually be 11. Yeah?
Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
But they also learned a lot about you.
True.
Is there anything that you didn't cover that you feel that readers should know before exploring your work?
No. I was actually really impressed, and admittedly, this is my job as a publisher, was to coach the authors the artisans that were going to appear on the first season, and to tell them, like, this is why I'm going to ask this type of question, and then this is why we do the after show fair play. You know, people want to see that, one, an artisan, an author doesn't put themselves up on a pedestal, but they also want to see that that artisan, that author supports other authors. So fair play was pretty important. And I would say, with a few exceptions, with one or two exceptions, everyone really embraced that. They were like, yes, I finally get to talk to Jennifer as an author, as opposed to just always looking at her as a publisher and needling her for, whatever information I can get from her to support my own career, their own careers. The authors really asked thoughtful questions about my life as a writer, and that made me feel really, really good. Like, wow, these people really see me as an individual, not just someone who serves them. And even though I'm very proud, I'm very honored to provide the service that I do at Blue Legacy with all of our divisions, it was nice to really feel seen. I would say if someone didn't watch every single episode in the first season of Speak, the one thing that they should probably know about my work is that I started very young as a teenager writing action adventure sci-fi, and then took a many decades hiatus from that to try to distance myself from that work because there was a lot of legal things that went down with it. I had to fight to get my rights back to it. And by the time that property was kind of free and clear, I had grown up both as an author, as a human, as a woman, and I was no longer writing action adventures. So I always kind of warn people, what I write now is almost entirely NC-17, and it's primarily hard science fiction, though I also write just straight dramatic fiction. I write some erotica, some surrealism, other kinds of sci-fi, but primarily the core of what I do is hard science fiction with a raw or primal bent to it. But so I guess I think most things about me, I think, were shared in that first season of Speak.
Well, could we instead then do a round of favorite things?
Yeah. Yes.
So you've worked for Blue Legacy, which is a nonprofit dedicated to educating, elevating, and empowering artisans from all walks of life since you were 16. And Blue Legacy has 4 divisions: Blue Forge Films, Blue Forge Press, Blue Forge Gaming, and Blue Forge Records. And you've published with all 4.
That's true.
What is your favorite film made by someone else, and also your favorite film made by you?
Okay. Oh.
This is our round of favorites.
Round of favorites, right? Yeah, this is definitely not a lightning round, is it? I'm like, I don't think I could say my absolute favorite, but I could say like
a favorite. Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see. Tying into certain things that I said in Speak, I am very fond of the David Lynch film Mulholland Drive. So I think I'll use that one because I did mention it and talked about David Lynch's work in other episodes of Speak. I think my favorite film that I wrote that has been made and is released right now, I guess I'll limit things that way.
Sure.
Because I think my answer would be different.
That's fair.
And I'll stick to a feature film because I feel like that's probably what people think of, not a short film or an art, like an ultra short or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I would say for that one, it would have to be Social Box. Mm-hmm. Social Box was actually started as a short story written in June of 2019.
Right, in the Trinity Anthology.
Yes, in the Trinity Project, which we've talked a lot about on Speak this season. So it is in my collection body of work. And it was written prior, again, June of 2019, prior to the pandemic, but it talks about a global pandemic that some would argue was a little bit more extreme than what we experienced in 2020, what we continue to experience, because it was an incredibly virulent virus, incredibly airborne, just like in the air in general. More like
isn't there a moment
The
where
Happening,
one of the
The
characters
Happening.
is talking about, or we hear someone talking about, well, you have this many minutes that you can spend outside
Yes,
today.
absolutely. And it's definitely less than 30. It's like the news broadcasts will actually say 7 minutes are perfectly fine outside today. So, it's like, yeah, forget about the mask. We're just not going out.
Yeah.
So I would say that would be my favorite film of my own that is available right now from Blue Forge Films.
All right, so favorite, I'm going to say story written by someone else,
Oh, okay.
and favorite story written by you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit. Because this isn't a short story, but it's not a
It doesn't have
novel.
to be short.
Okay, it's like a novella. It's in that way. When I was first starting in this industry, if it wasn't 50,000 words, you better not call it a novel. You better not even call it a book. If it was less than 50,000 words, it was a long short story, and you were not to send it to an agent or a publisher and try to pitch it as a novel. If you can imagine, since I first started writing novel length work when I was 10 years old, and I was hand writing them in longhand.
I've seen them.
Yes. And there was no spell check, so there's that, but there was also no word count. And so for my first 2 novels, I actually counted. One,
That's
okay,
incredible.
I'm going to be counting now, because I was like, well, I don't want to turn something in and embarrass myself and have it be under 50,000 words. I would say there is, I don't remember either of the authors' names right now. I'm drawing a complete blank. But
I'm sure we can look them up and pop them up on the screen.
Absolutely. It's called This Is How We Lose the Time War.
Yes.
I believe is the title.
Yes.
And I like bringing it up because it is a novella. I don't believe it's over 50,000 words. It's team written. Every chapter, it goes back and forth between 2 authors. Each of them write from the perspective of a different character. Those characters are chasing each other, first as enemies, then as comrades, or at least comrades on opposite sides of a conflict, and then ultimately as lovers. And it's across time and space and dimension. I found it beautifully written and unapologetically eloquent. Unapologetically, like, it uses all the 25-cent words, I think is how people might say it. And that's some of the things that I really like about Richard Calder, who I love. He wrote Dead Boys, Dead Girls, Dead Things. Some of Neil Stephenson's work, some of Charles Stross's work. That's the work that I'm drawn to, is words that draw from, or stories I should say, that draw words from across multiple cultures, so like, instead of just referring, say, to the pop culture of America, we're actually drawing on all the different popular culture from a lot of different countries and their mythology and all of that. And it really, stories like that to me feel global, and they make me feel like I'm part of something bigger. I'm part of all of humanity instead of just an American writer or an American reader. So I would say that would be my answer for a story. For my own story, I think I would have to say When Wanda Woke the World, which is part of the Trinity Project. So many of us authors, the 9 of us, we should all be grateful for that project, and I know I am. I think gratitude is one of the least appreciated emotions. I wish there was more gratitude in the world. Gratitude and kindness. and then I'm going to throw altruism in there as well. But now we're getting ridiculous. But I really wanted to write about law enforcement, about police reform, and about how one voice really can make a difference, even when that voice is from within a system. Because we often hear, I couldn't make change from within a system. And though ultimately the narrator in When Wanda Woke the World does leave that system, it was so vitally important that he started within this construct. And we got to see this moment in his life when everything changed, literally. The way his children saw him change, the way he saw himself change, the way he saw his high school crush changed, the way he saw reality changed. That story was in my head for months. And I was working on the Trinity Project, and I told myself, you don't really have time to do other creative writing, but this title, which I have said in an episode of Speak this season, I get my titles first. And it was just When Wanda Woke the World. And that title just came fully formed, like Athena from the head of Zeus, right? And I kept asking myself, how did she wake the world? Who is Wanda? How old is she? Is she a little girl? Is she a grown woman? Is she straight? Is she gay? Is she working class? Is she upper class? Is she an alien? When does this take place? I started asking all of these questions, and it was only when I received that prompt, and I don't actually even recall right now what the exact prompt was, but something in me said, oh, it's Wanda, but Wanda is who woke the world. It's Jared, the police officer. He's your narrator. And that story was everything I needed it to be, I think, to address the violence in my own past and losing my father to police violence, and to come to terms with it. It could have been just one voice. Just one person on the force could have made a change. I'm very proud. I feel like at Blue Forge Press, we publish some folks that worked in law enforcement or that work in law enforcement, and I feel like they can be that voice, or they were that voice when they were active officers. And so I think that story would have to be my favorite right now.
It's one of my favorites of yours as well.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Are you ready for the next
Oh my gosh,
one?
these are getting harder. Okay.
Okay. Favorite game published by someone else, and favorite game that you created.
Okay. Well, until very recently, I created the core mechanic, which is basically the operating system for a game, for role-playing games and tabletop games and card games. And I actually designed the patented stacked system, which is an operating system for card games where the cards actually interact with each other, and there are holes in the cards called passes, and certain numbers will show or not show through the cards. And I'm smiling, you're smiling, and of course the reason is because that's actually how we met.
It is
how you and I met. Was I had designed the core mechanic for a game called Mardi Gras 3000 that pitted punk, kind of goth, fallen angels that were very Christ-like, meaning very New Testament Christian. There's not judgment and hatred. There was a lot of acceptance and love, and they were very diverse. It pitted them against these four-dimensional creatures that looked a lot like clowns, that were alien beings called celestials. The game did remarkably well. It had gone into a massive second printing, and it was being sold nationally, and we were holding tournaments, and a beautiful young woman showed up to one of the tournaments and swept the tournament and took first place, and her name was Brianne DiMarco. So I would have to say, just because of the nature that game went on to connect me with the greatest love of my life and my future wife and a future co-parent to my children. I would have to say Mardi Gras 3000 is the favorite game that I've done. My favorite game by someone else, I am going to have to go completely old school, totally retro, and say Steve Jackson's Sorcery. I have almost every game, every tabletop role-playing game, etc. that I had as a teenager. They are precious to me. They are falling apart. Their boxes are waterlogged, but I have them. That game is a role-playing game, choose-your-own-adventure hybrid, where you have a book that basically acts as your game master, and you actually have a spell book that's a separate book, and the dice are printed on the page so you can flip randomly through the book to roll your dice, and you have health points and you have provisions and you have all these kind of things. It's so robust. It's so much more than a choose your own adventure, and it is, I think it's a series of, I want to say 4 books. Sorcery is the first one. They get progressively harder from there. I'm sorry, the series is called Sorcery. With an exclamation point. And I believe, though the editions that I have are now out of print, I believe the series is now available as an app.
It is. I actually have the first one.
Yes. Yes.
I played through the entire first, I guess you would call it the first novel or first game book.
Installment? Volume?
Installment. Yeah,
I'm not even
really
campaign?
sure.
I guess in role-playing game terms.
I'm not sure if you would say campaign, because the story continues in the second, doesn't it?
That's true. Yeah, it's like these mini...
But it is. It was on the App Store, and it was a beautiful adaptation with music and incredible graphics and movement.
Definitely worth it.
I would highly recommend. And Steve Jackson is the same creator who did the very popular Munchkin series, which I think is one of his current game series.
Oh, okay. And I want to say he also did Car Wars. Again, this is back in the 90s. But I just adore him. I love his work. I think he was thinking outside the box. I think we see more book-based role-playing now. Just like we see card-based role-playing now, and we see game master less, games without a game master. We see those now as well. But when I was growing up, those things were, groundbreaking and unheard of. Like book-based was unheard of, groundbreaking, or other way around, I should say. Him doing sorcery book-based was just so groundbreaking, and unheard of was not having a game master, having something based on cards, or something more storytelling, less mechanics. And I love that there's really anyone can do tabletop gaming now. You can enjoy it any age. You can pick it up. There are micro RPGs, which is something I've only recently started to explore, where you can literally learn the rules in 15 or 30 minutes, play in 2 hours, and that's it. That's the whole kit and caboodle. So yeah, gaming is a fantastic industry. I'm very proud that Blue Forge Gaming has now grown so that we hopefully in 2022 will start to release our first PC-based games. So,
all right. Last one.
Okay.
A favorite album. It doesn't have to be
a favorite album.
A favorite album that someone else has made and that you've made.
Well, Irene, I think you could probably answer this one for me. Okay, my favorite album, or a favorite album, classic from growing up, would be Joni Mitchell's Blue. Is my favorite.
It's a beautiful album.
I think, I'm just going to leave it at that. I was going to say, and then modern, I could say, other ones, but I think, no, I'm just going to leave it at that because it's supposed to be one. Favorite album that I did, I think would, oh my gosh. So I have done, I build harps. Because because why not? Because why not, right? Why not also be a woodworker?
Because you're a Jennifer of all trades.
I'm a Jennifer of all trades, that's right, yes. So I build harps, and from that came composing original harp music, because I liked to build a harp and then play it. And I just felt that every harp has its own story to tell. And before I would ship the harp off to its commissioned owner, I liked to hear its story because I was never going to hear from it again. So, I get attached to inanimate objects. It's a thing I do. So there's an album that I did of original harp music called Tied with a Silver Chain. And that is speaking about, it's going back to the song Southern Cross by Crosby, Stills and Nash, which I also understand some folks say should not be credited them, but I'm not going to try to get into all of those politics. I'm just saying the first version I ever heard was the Crosby, Stills and Nash version. So I would say probably that album. I've also done some electronic dance music because, again, why not? But I think that would have to be my favorite. That would have to be. There's a lot of love songs on that particular album. I play with the sounds of rain and waves and things like that in addition to the harp, and that meant a lot to me. And actually, there's also several songs where you can hear my rings.
Yes, which I love. It's so beautifully authentic.
It certainly. I mean, on the album, we talk about it as raw, music. It's not heavily produced. It's like listening to a live concert, and I think that's also something for me is that I've always really preferred and adored live concert albums, and so that idea was very much like you could almost hear my hands on the strings, and I really, really love that because I feel like it takes me all the way back to that moment, and then I get to revisit that, and I think that's very special.
I love that. Thank you. Each season on Speak, we ask guests to share their opinion on one or two pressing issues in the creative industry today. This season, season 1, everyone considered online versus bricks and mortar bookstores and how to distinguish themselves from the 600,000 books that are published each year.
600,000 novels even. Yeah, not even just books. At first I thought it was just books, and then I dug it up again. Novels. So these are fiction books.
Fiction versus nonfiction.
Yeah. So that's 600,000 fiction books. And then on top of that, there are nonfiction books of some, I'm sure, astronomical number published. Anyway, I'm sorry.
That is just incredible.
Yeah, I don't think it's unfair to say it's a glut of content, and I'm not putting down any of that content. Obviously, my books are in there with the 600,000, but it's almost an incomprehensible number in terms of thinking about consuming that much content. There's literally more being published, and I think one could argue, just probability-wise, even if we just looked at novels that someone would find high quality, and I know that high quality is defined by the reader ultimately.
Yeah.
But even so, I would think every single year, 600,000 more, just probability-wise, chances are that's more than I could possibly ever read in a year. And I love that feeling that there's always something new to discover, if not from this year, from last year, or the year before that, or the 10 years ago. It's such a wonderful feeling that all of that is out there. We just have to find it. And I think that's a great challenge.
So where do you stand between bricks and mortar stores and buying books online?
Well, I think this is where, and I've loved this metaphor lately. I've used it a couple of times, I think actually on Speak, but also just in everyday life. I think this is where my path and the artisans that I spoke to this season on Speak, our paths are going to diverge in the wood.
Are you taking the one less traveled by or more traveled by?
Well, in this case, I think I'm going to have to take the one less traveled by, at least in terms of the other artisans that I interviewed this season. Though I love walking into a used bookstore, like for instance the fantastic Bookham in Port Orchard, Washington, or more of the franchise indie/chain. It's like it's an interesting halfway between those two half-price books. The one that I really like is in Tacoma. You and I have spent many an evening there. Though I do enjoy going to a bookstore, a used bookstore like that, I do not enjoy going into a new bookstore. When I was a teenager and I was touring with my first novel, or rather my first corporate published novel that I toured with, the Walden's, B. Dalton's, Barnes & Noble, these were still all, I mean, there was a Walden's and a B. Dalton's and often a Barnes & Noble in every single mall, all three of them, 3 bookstores per mall. And you did not walk into those bookstores to buy Legos, Squish Animals, Harry Potter merchandise,
Board games,
even blank journals. You didn't. It was books. And that was a different world. And people say, well, those stores, especially B. Dalton's and Walden, started to close, when Amazon really started to take off. Because let's be honest, when we're talking about buying books online, we're talking about Amazon. There are maybe a handful of other places where people regularly buy online books, but it's primarily Amazon.
All of the authors that I follow, when they have pre-sales for their books, which they all do, it's always Amazon.
And it's 97% of all book sales made online are made by Amazon. So I'm kind of like, wow, that's a massive number. Okay. Do I feel that Amazon is killing the bricks and mortar stores? No. I feel that the bricks and mortar stores are being killed by the fact that they have ceased to become community hubs. It's no longer okay to walk in and sit all day with a book. Why? Because rents have continued to go up. Costs have continued to go up, and bookstores just can't be that. They don't make any money if you're sitting there in a comfy chair that, they're going to have to maintain and keep clean, and the masses of humanity. I'm not even talking about the pandemic. I'm just talking about people.
Right.
And they have all of this overhead. The other thing is that I think that the chain and corporate stores, which are pretty much all that's left when it comes to new bookstores. Now, I know that some people will argue that, especially like in Seattle, with Elliott Bookstore, University Bookstore, you could say, well, those are independent or college associated, entities. They're not corporate, but still, most of these large stores that sell new books, publishers can buy shelf space. They're encouraged to buy shelf space. And the shelf space that is there in every genre, almost by necessity, needs to be stocked with New York Times and Seattle Times and LA Times bestsellers, because those are the books that the market says are selling. They've got to pay their employees, they've got to pay their outrageous overhead, and they have limited shelf space. There is no limited shelf space on Amazon. So the chances of finding a book that is not on one of these regional bestsellers lists is much greater. But I have also found during this season of Speak that a lot of our artisans have no idea, and this is our artisans, these are people working in this field, they have no idea how to browse an online store. They didn't even know it was possible. Just like a lot of our artisans, even though we used to do a weekly video show called Hello Monday, where we updated artisans and tried to educate them. And then we changed that to a blog that could come out whenever we had something to share, so that we didn't have to wait week to week. Though we have tried to educate our artisans and we've tried to send, personal emails out and all this kind of thing, most of our artisans hate marketing so much. I believe it was Janice and Jim that I spoke to this season on Speak, who talked about, we love writing, but we hate marketing. And, all authors are like that. Or I don't think they made that generalized a statement, but because of course it's not true. Some authors love marketing. I love marketing because to me, marketing is what actually gets my book into the hands of readers.
And we've heard from some of our artisans who talk about, that's one of the things that they think about before they even write it.
Yes.
What am I going to do with this?
Yes.
How do I market this?
Yes. And I think though that really when Janice and Jim were talking about that, what I heard is, we don't like marketing online. Mm-hmm. We're not particularly tech savvy. We, all of the ever-changing social media platforms. Because one of the things that our artisans didn't know is we had told our artisans, go over and start for yourself. It is free. Your author profile page, your author central profile page on Amazon. And I would say 1/4 of our authors did that. Now, one of our authors who did that, and actually Michelle Lee, she gave me a wonderful ego boost the day that she said, I watched in one of your Hello Mondays where you talked about being an author very early on, and you said to your readers, hey guys, if you write to me and tell me a little bit about yourself, I'll write to you into my book. And of course, you then basically are deputizing little helpers to help market your book, because anyone, if they're in a book, they're going to want to tell people about that book. And Michelle said, I did that, Jennifer. And it's fantastic. I've got, 10 books, 15 books out of fans coming, readers coming, finding me on a basic social media page and going, oh, what a cool idea. Yes. Put me in one of your books. And Michelle mentioned, she goes, well, yeah, you guys said go make an author page. It was hard. I figured it out. If I needed help, I wrote to Amazon's help. And one of the cool things is you can see sales reports. And the crazy thing is that because I'm the publisher, as an author, I see the sales reports that come in. And we share, here every month, we pay royalties every month, which I know you know, Brianne. But a traditional publishing house pays either twice a year or 4 times a year. Well, we pay monthly. So I'm seeing the reports monthly. So I had never had any reason as an author to look up the reports myself. But often our artisans are like, oh, how can I see the sales? Because royalty reports pay on a 3-month lag.
Right.
So I'm seeing, once they pay, I'm seeing the report. But how was this month? Mm-hmm. And here it was all along at their fingertips. And that is so hard for me, because I'm like, online bookstores are the way to go, because they empower the author. And I don't think enough authors see that, is that if you walk into a corporate store, not a used bookstore, but a new bookseller, there may or may not be someone there who knows anything about books. There may or may not be an employee there who is well educated in high lit or poetry or science fiction. They may not know the difference between the various subgenres of romance, like I was talking about with our artisan Carrie Avery Moriarty. I feel like an online bookstore helps narrow down, and if you know how to browse, you can find military memoir American, and suddenly you find Uncle Sam and I, or one of the other books that we have that are, they're independently published by a nonprofit press. They aren't maybe on a huge regional bestseller list, but that doesn't mean they're not a worthwhile read. If anything, they're going to be fresh and unique, and they're not going to be the formula fiction that we so often see repeat itself over and over and over again. At some point, if we keep putting the same 10 writers on the bestsellers lists, they're telling variations of their own stories over and over again, and it becomes tedious. So I'm always on the lookout for fresh voices, and I think online stores are where we can find fresh voices, because independent, small press work is by and large not going to be on the shelves at a corporate store.
That's very true.
They don't want to special order something and put it out. They have to reserve and conserve their shelf space. So I am firmly in the online bookstore, on team online bookstore. And I would even take it a step further and say there are entire marketing courses that are under $200 that are not geared to a publisher. They're geared to what you can do as an author, working directly, not self-publishing. You have a publisher, they're paying for everything. But you as an author taking one of these courses, you can learn all these different things you can do at Amazon. And it basically like breaks down Amazon for you. And I'm like, wow, that I think is, there is no marketing course that breaks down how you can work with Barnes & Noble, a Barnes & Noble superstore, to make sure your book sells well beside Lego kits. So I guess that's my very aggressive opinion on...
Or plush stuffed animals?
Yeah. Well, and I did tell this story on Speak, but I will say I think it bears repeating, and that is walking into a Barnes & Noble superstore to find the classic children's book, Good Dog Carl, because I wanted to give it to a friend for their baby shower, and not only did no one in the store know the book,
wow,
but they did not have the book, and the book has been published, I mean, millions of copies of this book have sold. Right. This is not an old book, it's not a classic book. It was, it's in board book, hardback, trade paper, mass market paper. It's in every type of children's book printing possible. And the children's book section at Barnes & Noble Superstores have remained very large. So clearly children's books move at Barnes & Noble stores, because that is definitely a genre they have not cut back on.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah. So there was no reason that, well, we can special order it for you in 2 weeks. And of course, I thought to myself, this is before Prime, but I still thought to myself, well, I can get it faster from Amazon. Why did I drive all this way? Why did I spend this gas to come and speak to people who know nothing? I was very, very irritated. But again,
it sounds really frustrating.
It was just frustrating, yeah. So
where do you stand on distinguishing yourself, your novels, short story collections, from the other 600,000 fictional novels that are released every year?
Well, I would love to be indistinguishable from Charles Stross or Richard Calder. Specifically, I guess I would have to argue Richard Calder. That's the author that I am most said, oh, your work reminds me of. I don't think it has anything to do with my style. It has to do with the fact that I deal with a lot of hard science, and I have no hesitance writing about sex. And I think that folks assume that when you say that, you're writing this, fluffy, euphemism-laced erotica for the sake of erotica, with a lot of the same phrases and activities repeated ad infinitum. And I'm like, no, I think that sex can be part of a healthy lifestyle. I'm very sex positive. And also, and I did touch on this a little in earlier episodes of Speak, is that at my day job, I have to present relatively G-rated. Everything is gosh darn and golly gee, and that's primarily because I work a lot with children. And people say, wait a minute, I thought you work at, Blue Legacy and you're like this publisher. And I'm like, yeah, but we also do a lot of philanthropy work. We run a youth group for developmentally divergent kiddos and young adults. We publish children's books. We teach writing workshops. We really do work with people from cradle to grave, so to speak, and beyond, because we're a legacy publisher. So whether it's books, albums, films, or games, our contracts guarantee that work stays in print. Even if your heirs come to us and say, no, take it out of print. No, you are protected, because as a legacy press, we can continue to sell your work. And your heirs can waive the royalty if they don't want to collect your royalty, but then we're going to give it to the charity of your choice for forever, for as long as the company exists. So I think my work is distinguished for a couple of reasons. One, I'm a woman writing in science fiction. Right there, the fact that I'm not hiding behind a nom de plume, I'm not pretending to be someone that I'm not. To take that a step further, I am a gay woman writing in science fiction. I often write stories from a male perspective, but just as often I write about characters who are lesbians. This isn't because I'm trying to be a shock jock. I am simply writing what I know. Growing up, I was often closest to male friends and male figures in my life, and I think that's why I'm drawn to male characters. But in terms of writing realistic lesbian characters, the way they see life, all the spectrum that is what it is to be a gay woman today, 10 years ago, 50 years from now, the way sexuality isn't just who you go to bed with. Sexuality, though I have heard it said sexuality is a political decision, though I do believe there are some politics, there is such a thing as sexual politics, I don't think it is a political decision ultimately. I feel that people still see lesbians as a certain way. We have to be masculine. Every relationship has to have a stereotypical male and female point counterpoint. I've still had artisans look me in the eye and make incredibly ignorant comments like, for children to be healthy, they need a mother and a father. And I'm like, well, interesting that you say that. I actually do believe that children do best with two parents, but I was also a single mom for almost a decade. And so, do I feel my children thrived with two parents? Yes, because it was two different perspectives, but it wasn't a man and a woman, it was two women.
And you were also raised by a single mom for a
long
time.
Yes, I was. Yes, my father was killed when I was 4. My sister was arrived 2 months after his death. So, yeah, I have a lot of respect for her. Now, what do you do when there is only one parent in the home? I think she did, my mother, a good job at that for many years of making sure that I had both sets of grandparents in my life, not just to have a grandfather, but also a grandmother. Again, those different perspectives. So I think what distinguishes my work from other science fiction writers, despite my sexuality, and despite my gender, which I do think do set me apart somewhat, is that I'm not shy. My personal writing, the writing that I do for publication, is uncensored. It's raw. I'm not writing for any of our artisans. I am absolutely 100% hands down certain that we have artisans who I adore and they adore me, but they are horrified by what I write. And I feel the same way about some of our artisans. I adore them, they adore me, but I would never write what they write. The difference is I see the value in what they're writing, and I think their story needs to be told. I don't think all of our artisans believe that about my work, and that's okay, because I'm not writing for the whole wide world. I'm writing for people who like the kind of science fiction I write. Raw, edgy, sometimes uncomfortable, and I'm gonna explore things that maybe they haven't thought about. Like, what if you're in love with a woman, and you're a man, and you find out that for her day job, she works as a prostitute who's a boy. How would you feel about that? Would you feel emasculated? Would you feel lost? Would you feel like this isn't a dichotomy that you could embrace? And people say, where in the world did you get that idea? And I'm like, right out of life. So I think that's what sets me apart, is the life I've lived. And that's why I feel that artisans are not competitors to one another, because the best writers, their life influences their stories. And I'm not saying they're all writing nonfiction, we're not, but we each impart our own experiences into our stories, and I think that elevates them and makes them unique.
Jumping topics for a moment.
Okay.
So you are the regular host of Speak, or at least you were for the first season. Mm-hmm. What did you find to be the most rewarding part of hosting Speak? And I would also ask, what was your biggest challenge?
Oh, okay. This I can actually answer, and maybe I won't have to write a novel to answer it. I think the most rewarding part was finding out backstories, origin stories of some of these characters and some of these novels that we've published that I did not know before. In particular, I would have to bring up David McCullough's fantastic story about the late teen or 20-something farmhand who literally scared the bejeebies out of little 5-7-year-old David McCullough, little tiny kiddo in Scotland in the middle of the night, a storm rolling in, and this farmhand wanted to scare David and his brother a little bit and wove this tale of this Gome, this creature named Wally. And that is the main character all these years later. And I did not know that that's where this had come from. And I adored that. Likewise, Lauren Patzer, who is, I believe, our only exclusively, even though it's not exclusive because he also writes comedy sci-fi, but he's a horror writer with Blue Forge Press. And he said his comedy sci-fi series is called Res Tap, The Adventures of Res Tap. And the Res Tap series, he said, Res Tap comes from a friend of mine who just turned to me in I believe it was middle school and said, Patzer, which is Lauren's last name, is Res Tap backwards. And I'm like, that was the most rewarding thing, is I loved that. I have an incredible maternal love for every one of our artisans. Some of them drive me absolutely crazy because I feel like I've tried everything. Like I say, I've tried videos, I've tried blogs, I've tried direct emails, and I'm like, you guys are skimming, skipping, and missing the vital information. The most challenging thing was that. Sitting live across from people for the first time in some of these cases in almost 2 years because of the pandemic, and realizing that they were skimming my emails, not reading the blogs. These are things I take a lot of time and effort, asking things that I've answered multiple times over, in great detail. And because that fed into this feeling of when you are not educated, and I don't mean school educated, when you are not informed, when you don't take the effort and keep yourself informed, then you have no reason to be grateful or gracious. And it's not that you're not a grateful or gracious person, it's that you're not informed. You don't know what's happening and what's being done on your behalf. The blood, sweat, and tears, in a lot of cases, those three things literally, you just don't know. Because Blue Forge Press in particular, for instance, Blue Forge Press utilizes everything at its fingertips. So we source books through print-on-demand services. We source books through traditional printing services. We source books through niche services that only provide books to just chains or just Amazon or just southern states, stuff like this. Because we source in all these different ways, I think sometimes the artisans tend to forget that books cost money to print. And an average novel, when you're producing them in short run, which that's what small presses do, can cost as much, if it's a large 6x9, very thick, it could cost as much as $7 a unit. And we're ordering them, or more, and we're ordering them 1,000 at a time. So when someone says, when are you going to come out with my next book? And, I've got another one for you. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, it's not a given that we're going to publish everything you write. It needs to fit with our mission statement. But also, you're saying casually, when are you going to spend another $7,000 on me? Mm-hmm. And that money comes from somewhere. Someone's earning that. And as the CFO of Blue Legacy, primarily the person earning that is me. People say, why won't we watch this television show, Jennifer? Why didn't you get to see this movie? And I'm like, because I was busy working for you. You are the artisans. You don't work for me. I work for you. So I think that was the most challenging thing, was sitting across from folks and having those realizations of, this person doesn't know that. Mm-hmm. And not feeling comfortable to say, I've invested $42,000 in your work in the last 3 years. And I would just like you to please have an author profile at Amazon. So it's, it's like things like that. I want to feel like our artisans are active partners. And some artisans simply can't do that. They write the book, we publish the book, we pay to publish the book, we pay to market the book. We never hear from the author again because they've gone on and done other things. And I have to come to terms with the fact that that's how some authors are. Mm-hmm. That to some authors, they did all the work because they created the content. But because the company makes no money on the book sales, right, because all the profit that comes back to the company is folded into an account for that book that allows us to keep that book in print indefinitely. That's the legacy money. I'm like, your book has literally made this company nothing. We continue to support it. That's what we are as a nonprofit. So that was the most challenging thing, I guess, was not storming off set.
I guess it's the difference between someone being a writer and someone being an author.
Yes,
ultimately. A writer writes their story. An author has more of a job than that.
Yes.
And I see that across the board from
Yes.
the top list big publisher
100%.
authors all the way down to even self-published authors.
Absolutely.
Who are like, I run my everything every single day. This is
Yes.
my full-time job.
Mm. One of the things that's come up in Speak in previous episodes was me saying, I wish I could make it mandatory that all authors self-publish once. Self-publish once, sell 1,000 copies, then come back to me and let me know what you did to market your book. Because I can tell you what I do to market every book we have. And I personally, and I think Brianne, you would say this as well as senior editor at Blue Forge Press, that we personally could pitch any of our books.
Absolutely.
We know why we published them.
Absolutely.
We know how to separate the artist from the art and when that is important and when it is not. And we could market the book. But you're right. Some people are writers and that is okay. And I am learning how valid that position is. And I am allowing those folks to just be writers. But so I hope that answers. I'm trying to be as honest as possible. But
it does. Can we circle back to you as a creator?
Sure, I would love that.
All right. Your most recent book, which is Body of Work,
Yes.
Came of the Trinity Project,
Yes.
where 9 very different authors were sent a monthly writing prompt for 1 year. Body of Work is the 12 stories that you wrote, plus 1 more, and an interview with you, which I have to say is an excellent interview.
Thank you.
I quite enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I just found it very interesting as someone who I would say knows you very, very well. I felt like I still got a lot out of it.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that was really a really cool experience.
Thank you.
In Body of Work, you faced a particular demon that's haunted you for most of your 40-year career. Can you talk about that?
Oh, yeah. Right. Okay. So, I have always loved science fiction, specifically dystopian, post-apocalyptic science fiction. But those phrases, dystopian, science fiction, post-apocalyptic, those weren't phrases when I was a teen. There was no such thing. It was just science fiction. And so for a while there, I was just collecting rejection slips because I was writing in this subgenre of science fiction that received the death sentence of, we don't know where to put this. What is this? It's like after the end of the world science fiction? What's that? And it was a very hard sell at first. I was lucky that I started very early. I had written more than 12 novel-length works before I was even graduated high school at 17.
Which is phenomenal.
Thank you. I wrote definitely therapeutically. I wrote to center myself, to ground myself, to explore themes that I needed to explore for myself. I wasn't writing to teach anybody else anything. I was writing for me. So I also found out at that time that I could apply my writing skills to nonfiction and write relatively powerful, apparently, short stories and plays and poetry, and I could get those sold because none of them were science fiction. I wrote several short stories that were globally published, translated into lots of different languages: Survivors, Moral Fabrics, Child in the Storm, Every Woman, and a couple of others that were widely anthologized. I didn't even submit them to anthology. I would submit them to one anthology, and then 5 other anthologies would say, we'd like to buy the rights to this. And those stories were about the murder of my father, being raised by a single mom, being raised by a mom who realized she was gay, her finding and falling in love with another woman, my tenuous relationship with trying to find out what had happened to my father and why no one was telling me the truth, experiences that I had, neighbors that I met, conversations. And I think what spoke to people more than anything else was 2 things. As evidenced in Child in the Storm, I wrote about coming home on the school bus in the middle of one of the worst snowstorms in Washington history, in Seattle history, and the incredibly poor planning that the school district had done that wound up leaving the low-income kids that were part of the integrated busing scheme plan literally miles from their normal and completely off the route of their normal bus stop in the middle of a snowstorm. And furthermore, this is before cell phones, none of these parents were told where their child had been dropped off or when they'd been dropped off, and that idea of getting myself home. So being able to be a teenage girl who went to school that morning, there was no snow on the ground, to a almost 5-hour bus ride home, which was normally a 40-minute bus ride home, because again, this was integrated busing. So I was being shipped from a poor, primarily black neighborhood all the way across to an almost entirely white neighborhood where this school was, because it was this idea of shipping kids from low-income neighborhoods like the one where I lived to affluent neighborhoods and affluent schools so that everyone would get a more fair education. And I've written about that pretty extensively, but my fear, my anger, the pitch blackness of walking blocks in the snow on a cloudy night, no street lamps, the cold, all of that, I think that kind of raw and uncensored style that I brought to science fiction, I brought to that story. Likewise, this idea of we are all human beings, and instead of focusing on the bad in people, in the savagery in people, in the violence, to find the golden core at each of us and to celebrate that core. And that's what I did with the story, Every Woman, where I spoke with a neighbor, Ethel Rhodes, who was in her 90s, no lasting family, and she was on my way to my favorite hike. And every now and again, she would be on her porch. And one day I just decided, I'm going to say hello. And that turned into her inviting me in and us having jelly toast and tea and starting this wonderful friendship. There was actually 2 stories that I wrote about Mrs. Rhodes. But so nonfiction. And so of course what I got a lot of was people telling me, that's what you need to be writing. Family telling me. I shared another story about a professor that I had, Rebecca Brown, who is also a very well-known writer, who literally said in front of the whole class, held up one of my nonfiction stories that I turned in and a science fiction story I had turned in, and said, this is what you should be writing. This is beneath you. And to take that and to say, yes, but science fiction is what I love. So you guys can all jump in a lake, because I don't want to be known. I don't want to be remembered by what created me. I want to be remembered by what I create. And ultimately and wonderfully, in the Trinity Project, and I want to say it was, I don't remember which story it was now. Was it the 13th story? No, I don't think so. But one of the stories in there, I finally said, I'm going to write nonfiction. I'm going to put a nonfiction story in this collection, and I'm going to say that. Mm-hmm. I want to be remembered not by what created me, not the nonfiction of my life, but by what I create. Like it or hate it, take it or leave it, what I create is the core of who I am. And I think that it's important for people to see that you don't have to be a Patron swilling, cigar smoking, leather jacket wearing biker chick to swear like a sailor, to have sex like a rock star, to have no problems talking about sex and drugs and rock and roll. You can also be a Sunday school teacher, which I did for many, many years. A fantastic mom, I can say, with a huge ego that has never once raised her voice to her children, that doesn't believe in spanking, that's never grounded either of her children, and that sees her children first, a child first parent. I am all those things, but I am also the blunt, brazen author of all the stories and body of work, and all of those facets are part of me. So has nonfiction haunted me? Yes, and I feel that the Trinity Project was what finally turned that haunting around, and now I own those ghosts, and now I find a lot of joy in writing nonfiction. I don't think my artisans should probably read most of my nonfiction, but
We're all in charge of curating what we read.
yes, you know that that's one of my favorite things, is that
Absolutely.
I personally, and again, I always try to stipulate that this is not a company policy. I'm just a person. I personally do not believe in trigger warnings. I feel that ultimately we all have to curate what we read. And if a story becomes too intense, it's very rarely you turn the page and suddenly it's too intense. You know, stop reading. And if you know, like if I say, I write NC-17 stuff, okay? That's what I do. But I will say, I do not write about non-consensual sex. I do not write about any kind of non-consensual violence. And I would say, even if I am exploring SMBD or something like that, I'm talking more about power dynamic than I ever am about violence. So someone could know that about my work and go, oh, okay. Some sex, some swearing, some sexiness, some drug use. Oh yeah, I'm cool with her stuff. But what you're not going to find in my work is you're not going to find scenes of rape. You're not going to find scenes of violence against children. You're just not going to find it. It's not going to be there. So know an author. I think it's okay, especially with an independent press or a smaller press. Go ahead, write to the press and
Absolutely.
say, I really want to explore this author. Are there any basic trigger warnings that I might need to know? I know if someone wrote to you at Blue Forge Press, you would take the time to answer them if they asked a question like
Readers
that.
are actually encouraged in the Unnerving series, which you've written in all
Yes.
three of.
Yes.
They're encouraged, if they'd like trigger warnings, to reach out to me.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
there is,
absolutely.
I think, if I'm correct, the Unnerving series is one of the only series that Blue Forge Press does, I think with the exception of one other book, that have ever had any kind of trigger warnings, though ultimately we do say, if a story is too much for you, simply skip it, because it's a story a month in the Unnervings.
We do
know?
have a few novels that the author and I talked about it, and
Yeah.
we decided to include them, which would include Don't Forget Me. That one has a trigger warning for suicide and for self-harm.
So it's a very personal decision.
But for me, as a publisher, it really does depend on the book, the genre of book. The two that jump out to me are Don't Forget Me, which is a YA novel that tackles some really important but very intense themes.
Yeah.
And the memoir, I'm just gonna pause.
Light Sleeper, does that have a trigger warning? The Magic and the Nightmare, That Was Me.
Yes, the Magic and the Nightmare, That Was Me by Dakota
The Magic
Fox.
in the Nightmare, That Was Me. That's
Yes.
what I always, yeah.
And that one, I also added trigger warnings.
Yeah.
But for me, as a publisher, it really does depend on the novel. I find that by and large, they don't need them. I see it much as I've seen with film and TV shows.
Yeah.
Sometimes if something is particularly intense,
Yeah.
I'll see even just on one episode, even though the whole series of the show will have no trigger warnings, and there's lots of stuff that they
Yeah.
could have, but they'll have one episode where they're like, okay, this is really intense, and they'll put something in the beginning. And I find that very powerful, that we have the choice as the publisher
Absolutely.
and as an author to say, yes, I want this there, or no.
Yeah.
Me as a viewer, I definitely will look up if I'm like, oh, this seems like it might touch on this topic, which I might as myself find triggering, or someone that I'm watching with, either family or a friend.
Yeah.
And I often look up like parent guides. There's a lot that you can use the internet, and you can use parent guides, things like that, to figure out what's in something. And often, likely without too many spoilers. And I think that that's a really incredible tool for both readers and viewers, since we do work in film. That's
True.
often on my mind as well.
I think that to try really hard not to be a hypocrite. I think that there is that. I'm glad that you brought that up about the parent guides. I mentioned that in another episode of Speak, that I said, judge me as you will, internet, but and world and artisans, but when I do take the time to watch something, it is almost always something that my beautiful wife has curated for me, because and I talked about The Octopus Teacher and the impact that film had on me. But so again, I guess you might say I have a trigger warning system. So I guess I do believe in trigger warnings, because my trigger warning system is you. And I'm, not everyone has that. But I like that. I like that as a publisher, we give people that option. We do not try to sway them one way or the other. It is a personal decision, but that we are open to whatever that author wants. And we support them and stand beside them. Again, I am grateful to Blue Forge Press and to you for the incredible care that is taken with my work. I never want to be published by any other press, ever. I have done it. I have been there. I don't like it. And they can offer me a 6-figure advance. The answer is the same. And I had a friend that I mentioned that to once. We had a buyout offer for, actually, it wasn't a book. It was actually a show that we did. And I had said, we passed on this offer because it wasn't right for us. And she had mentioned the story to someone else, and they said, nobody does that. Nobody passes on like a 6-figure offer. And I'm like, that's so sad for me. It's really, and she said, she said to this third party, you don't know Jennifer. Right. You don't know these guys. And I'm like, and it makes me sad that person doesn't, that they don't know someone who would pass on, I don't care if it's 6 figures or if it's, a cool 2.5 million. If it's not the right deal, don't take it. Money is not everything. I would much rather roll pennies to buy groceries, which you and I have done in our 13 years.
I mean, nickels and dimes as well.
Yes, that's true. Good point.
The errant quarter.
The errant quarter. Ooh, a quarter. But if it has that pretty tree on the back, we would. No, okay. That's about the people in your life, and I feel like, boy, we should all have some people in our lives that will pass up $300,000 if the deal is wrong,
In a bricks and mortar bookstore, you can pick up a novel and you can flip through it to get a sense of the author's style. And even at Amazon, they have a look inside this book feature. What single page would you like to share with us today, Jennifer?
It's funny, so this is from my collection body of work, which is my most recently published work. I have completed another manuscript since this one called Sabbath Rising, and I'm working on a third, but I wanted to actually read, so this is a collection of 13 stories, like you said, plus an interview. It was part of the Trinity Project, and I would like to read the final page of the very first story, which is called Hannah at Night. Ociolism is realizing the smallness of your own single perspective. It wasn't a state of being I discovered until many, many years later, when politics and world events turned the world upside down and pink. It knocked the wind out of me, my ignorance, my bigotry, my loss. Fate or chance or some nameless gods, amused by my infinite stupidity, had handed me my soulmate, and I had thrown up on her hardwood floor. And mine wasn't a graceful exit. There were no insults slung, though I deserved them. No questions of my own inadequacies as a man, if I was so easily threatened by a girl wearing a dick. I didn't even have the self-respect to wipe off my face and slink away. I stayed. I stayed the 4 days I had off that week. Hannah left in the morning while I was still naked in her bed, exhausted from pot and cognac and the best sex I'd ever had in my life. And when I woke, I'd wander her home, drink more, admire the view, and conveniently be in the shower when she came home as a boy. Liberosis is the sincere desire to care less. I wish I could say I prayed or wished or bargained with those merciless gods to care less about something that 20 years later seems trivial and even petty. Such a small thing, maybe 8 or 10 inches. When I vomited that second night, Hannah actually laughed at me, and her laughter was nothing but kind. "It's okay, Michael," she assured me as she helped me into the bathroom, cleaned my face like a mother and child, gave me a toothbrush and mouthwash. "You don't have to keep pace with me." She had no idea how much of a problem that was. I suppose that's why I decided to write this, to write my one true sentence, because I created a problem where there was only perfection. And Hannah, if you read this somewhere, somehow, someday, please know I was an idiot. I should have been stronger. I should have returned your calls. I should have gone back to that dive bar and found you again. I should have gotten over my damn self and seen you for everything you were. A goddess, a god, a creature made of mercury as fluid as only quicksilver can be. I loved Hannah, but only at night. And that was my mistake.
That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you for letting me read.
I once said to Jennifer that what I love about her work is that in one moment, the story can be beautiful, elegant, and refined, and in the next moment, wild, untamed, and irreverent. And I think this is really what the best stories are made of. They're real moments of life that are in one moment fear and doubt, and in another clarity and understanding. And that's what creates the perfect story. It's a microcosm of who we are as people and as human beings. Thank you for joining us today for Speak. Speak is made possible by the 501c3 nonprofit Blue Legacy and is funded in part by the National Endowment of the Arts and the Washington Arts Commission. Would you like to appear on Speak? Do you have a question that you'd like answered by future artisans? Write to us at blueforgefilms@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. You are framed and focused, my darling, my love, my angel.